The sun was setting over the Rio Grande, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Thomas rode his horse slowly along the riverbank. Tired after a long day of work on his small ranch, the air was warm, and the sound of rushing water filled his ears. He had taken this path many times before, but today something felt different. Thomas was a simple man in his early 30s, strong from years of hard work under the desert sun. He lived alone on his property, raising cattle and fixing fences. Life on the frontier was not easy, but Thomas never complained. He had learned to survive with very little and respect the land around him. As his horse walked carefully along the muddy path, Thomas heard something unusual. At first, he thought it was just the wind or maybe an animal in the bushes. But then he heard it again, louder this time. It was a voice, a human voice calling out in distress. Thomas pulled on the reins and stopped his horse. He listened carefully, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. His heart began to beat faster. The voice was coming from the river. Someone was in trouble. Without wasting a second, Thomas jumped down from his horse and ran toward the water. The riverbank was steep and covered with rocks and thick bushes. He pushed through the branches, his boots slipping on the wet ground. Then he saw her, in the middle of the river. A woman was struggling against the powerful current. The water was wild and dangerous, pulling her downstream with terrible force. She was tall, much taller than any woman Thomas had ever seen. Her long black hair was tangled in the river reeds, and her arms fought desperately to stay above the surface. Thomas did not stop to think. He did not wonder who she was or where she came from. All he knew was that someone needed help, and he was the only one there. He kicked off his heavy boots and threw his hat on the ground. Then he dove into the cold water. The current hit him like a wall. Thomas gasped as the icy water surrounded him. The river was stronger than he expected, and it tried to pull him under. But Thomas was a strong swimmer. He pushed forward with all his strength, fighting against the rushing water. The woman was only a few yards away, but it felt like miles. She was coughing and gasping for air, her eyes wide with fear. Thomas could see she was losing strength. Her head dipped below the surface for a moment, then came back up. "Hold on," Thomas shouted, though he knew she might not understand English. He reached out his hand, stretching as far as he could. The woman saw him and tried to move closer, but the current was too strong. Thomas took a deep breath and pushed himself forward one more time. His fingers finally touched her arm. He grabbed it tightly and pulled her toward him. The woman held on to him with a grip so strong it almost hurt. Together, they fought against the river. It was the hardest battle of Thomas's life. Every muscle in his body screamed in pain. His lungs burned from the effort. The water tried to separate them, pushing and pulling in different directions. But Thomas refused to let go. Slowly, inch by inch, Thomas dragged them both toward the riverbank. His feet finally touched the rocky bottom. He used the last of his strength to pull the woman onto the shore. Both of them collapsed on the wet ground, breathing heavily. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just lay there. Exhausted and soaking wet, Thomas's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. His whole body trembled from the cold and the effort. Finally, the woman sat up. Water dripped from her hair and clothes. Thomas looked at her for the first time in the fading light. She was indeed a giant, easily over 6 feet tall. With broad shoulders and strong features, her wet deerskin dress clung to her frame, and intricate beadwork decorated her wrists. She was Apache, Thomas realized. The woman looked at Thomas with dark, intelligent eyes. She seemed to be studying him, trying to understand why this stranger had risked his life for her. Then, in a soft voice, she spoke a few words in her native language. Thomas did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was thanking him. Thomas nodded and gave her a tired smile. "You're safe now," he said gently. Even though he knew she probably did not speak English, the woman stood up slowly, testing her legs. She was shaken, but unharmed. She looked at Thomas one more time, as if memorizing his face. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Moving with surprising speed and grace despite her ordeal, Thomas watched her go, still sitting on the muddy ground. His heart was still racing. He wondered who she was and if he would ever see her again. The sky was now almost dark. and the stars were beginning to appear. With great effort, Thomas got to his feet and walked back to where his horse was waiting. He put on his boots, picked up his hat, and climbed back into the saddle. As he rode home in the darkness, Thomas could not stop thinking about the giant Apache woman and the desperate look in her eyes when she was drowning. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness would change his life forever. He did not know that the next day would bring visitors to his door, or that the woman he saved was the daughter of a powerful chief. All Thomas knew was that he had done the right thing, and that was enough for him. Thomas woke up before dawn, his body aching from the events of the previous night. Every muscle felt sore, and his hands were covered with small cuts from the sharp river rocks. He sat up slowly in his small wooden bed and looked around his simple cabin. The morning light was just beginning to peek through the cracks in the walls. He had not slept well. His mind kept replaying the rescue over and over. He could still see the woman's face, her eyes filled with fear as the water pulled her under. He wondered if she had made it safely back to her people. He hoped she was all right. Thomas got dressed and walked outside to start his morning chores. The air was cool and fresh, and the birds were singing their morning songs. His ranch was small but well kept, with a few cattle grazing in the distance and chickens pecking around the yard. This was his life, simple and peaceful, exactly the way he liked it. He started his day the way he always did, by checking on his animals and mending a broken fence post that had been bothering him for days. The work was hard but familiar, and it helped him stop thinking about the strange encounter at the river. Around mid-morning, Thomas was carrying a bucket of water to his garden when he heard the sound of horses approaching. This was unusual. His ranch was far from town, and visitors were rare. He put down the bucket and walked toward the front of his property. Shielding his eyes from the bright sun, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. 3 Apache men were riding slowly toward his cabin. They sat tall and proud on their horses. Their faces were serious and calm. The man in the middle was older, with long gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore traditional clothing decorated with beautiful beadwork and feathers. The 2 younger men on either side looked strong and watchful. Like warriors, Thomas felt his heart begin to race. He had heard stories about Apache warriors, some good and some frightening. He knew that many settlers feared them, but Thomas had always tried to respect all people no matter where they came from. Still, he could not help feeling nervous as the 3 men came closer. The riders stopped a few yards away from Thomas. The older man in the middle looked down at him with dark, intelligent eyes. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavy and important. Thomas stood still, waiting. He did not want to seem afraid or disrespectful. Finally, the older man raised his hand in a gesture of peace. He climbed down from his horse with slow, dignified movements. The 2 younger warriors stayed mounted, watching Thomas carefully. The older man walked forward until he stood directly in front of Thomas. "You are the one who saved my daughter," the man said in clear but accented English. His voice was deep and strong, like thunder rolling across the plains. Thomas was surprised that the man spoke English. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I pulled a woman from the river last night. I hope she is well." The older man studied Thomas's face for a long time, as if trying to see into his soul. "My name is Chief Canny," he said. "The woman you saved is Neshoba. My youngest daughter. She told me what you did. You risked your life for someone you did not know. This is not common among your people." Thomas felt uncomfortable with the praise. "Any decent person would have done the same," he said quietly. "I just happened to be there." Chief Canny shook his head. "You are wrong. Many men would have ridden past. Many would have been too afraid to enter the water, but you did not hesitate. My daughter says you fought the river like a warrior. You did not give up even when the current tried to take you both." Thomas did not know what to say. He looked down at his boots, feeling embarrassed. "I am just glad she is safe," he finally replied. The chief nodded slowly. "Among my people, when someone saves a life, a debt is created. This debt must be honored. I have come to give you a reward for your bravery." "That's not necessary," Thomas said quickly. "I don't want anything. I am just happy she is alive." but Chief Connie raised his hand to stop him. "This is our way. You will not refuse." There was no anger in his voice, but Thomas understood that this was not a request. It was about honor and tradition, something far more important than money or goods. One of the young warriors dismounted and walked to his horse's side. He untied something wrapped in soft leather and brought it to the chief. Chief Connie took the bundle and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a shield, unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. The shield was round and made of thick buffalo hide. Its surface was painted with symbols that Thomas did not understand. Circles and lines in red, black, and white. Around the edge were eagle feathers, each one tied with careful attention. In the center was the image of a great bird with its wings spread wide. The beadwork was intricate and beautiful, clearly the work of a master craftsman. "This shield belonged to my grandfather," Chief Connie said, holding it out toward Thomas. "It was blessed by our holy men and has protected 3 generations of my family. It has seen many battles and has never failed. Now it belongs to you." Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. He could see how valuable and sacred this object was. "Chief Connie, I cannot accept this. It belongs to your family. It is too important." The chief's expression remained firm. "It is precisely because it is important that I give it to you. My daughter's life is worth more than any object, even one as precious as this. You gave her back to me, and for that I give you this shield. It will protect you as you protected her." Thomas reached out slowly and took the shield. It was heavier than he expected, solid and real in his hands. He could feel the history and meaning in every feather and painted line. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will treasure this always, I promise." Chief Connie placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You are a good man, Thomas. The river showed me your heart. My people will remember what you did. If you ever need help, you will have friends among the Apache." The 2 men stood together for a moment, a bridge between 2 different worlds. Then Chief Connie turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted with the grace of a man who had spent his entire life on horseback. The 3 Apache men turned their horses and began to ride away. Thomas watched them go, still holding the sacred shield in his hands. As they disappeared into the distance, he felt that something fundamental had changed. He had woken up that morning as a simple rancher, alone and unknown. Now he was connected to people and traditions he barely understood. The shield in his hands was not just a gift. It was a responsibility, a symbol of trust and friendship. Thomas walked slowly back to his cabin, looking down at the shield with wonder and respect. He had no idea that this was just the beginning, that the rescue and this gift would change not only his life, but the lives of many others in ways he could never imagine. Thomas spent the rest of that day sitting on his porch, staring at the ceremonial shield that now rested against the wall of his cabin. He traced his fingers over the painted symbols, wondering about the stories behind each mark. The eagle feathers moved gently in the afternoon breeze, and the beadwork sparkled in the sunlight. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever owned, but it also made him feel uneasy. He knew that accepting this gift would change things. Life on the frontier was complicated enough without adding more tension between settlers and the Apache people. Thomas had always tried to keep to himself, avoiding conflict and staying out of other people's business. But now he had a sacred Apache shield hanging in his home, and that was bound to cause talk. The next morning, Thomas needed supplies from town. He loaded his wagon with some cattle hides he planned to sell and began the long journey to the settlement. It was a small trading post called Dusty Creek. About 3 hours away by wagon, the town consisted of a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small church, and a handful of houses scattered along the main road. As Thomas rode into town, he noticed something strange. People were staring at him. Old Mrs. Henderson, who usually waved from her garden, turned away quickly. 2 men standing outside the general store stopped talking and watched him pass with cold eyes. Even the dogs seemed quieter than usual. Thomas tied his horse to the post outside the general store and walked inside. The bell above the door rang, and the conversation inside stopped immediately. 4 men were gathered around the counter, talking with the store owner, Mr. Patterson. They all turned to look at Thomas. "Morning," Thomas said. trying to sound normal and friendly, warning, "Thomas," Mr. Patterson replied, but his voice was stiff and formal. The other men just nodded slightly, their faces unreadable. Thomas walked to the back of the store to collect the flour and coffee he needed. He could hear the men whispering behind him, but he could not make out the words. The atmosphere in the store felt heavy and uncomfortable, like a storm about to break. When Thomas brought his items to the counter, Mr. Patterson counted them up without looking him in the eye. "That will be $2.15, he said quietly. Thomas paid and started to leave, but one of the men, a tall rancher named Dutch Miller, stepped in front of him. Dutch was known for his bad temper and his strong opinions. He owned a large ranch on the other side of town and had a reputation for causing trouble. "Heard you had some visitors yesterday," Dutch said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Apache visitors," Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes." "That's right. Word is you saved one of them from drowning," another man added. This was Billy Cox, a younger settler who always seemed to follow Dutch around like a shadow. "I saved a woman who was drowning," Thomas corrected. "She was a person in trouble. I would have done the same for anyone," Dutch laughed. But there was no humor in it. "That's real noble of you, Thomas. But some folks are wondering whose side you're on. We got families here, children. We can't have people making friends with the Apache and inviting trouble to our town." Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "I am not inviting trouble. I pulled someone out of a river. That is all. Her father came to thank me. That is all. I am not choosing sides in anything." "That is not what we heard," Billy said, leaning against a barrel of beans. "We heard they gave you some kind of war shield, some kind of Apache weapon. Why would they give you that unless you made some kind of deal with them?" "There was no deal," Thomas said firmly. "It was a gift of gratitude, nothing more." Dutch stepped closer, and Thomas could smell whiskey on his breath even though it was barely noon. "You listen here, Thomas. This territory is dangerous enough without folks like you stirring things up. The Apache have attacked settlements before. They have killed families, stolen cattle. We need to stick together. Not go making friends with them." Mr. Patterson finally spoke up from behind the counter. "Now, Dutch, let us not jump to conclusions. Thomas has always been a peaceful man. I am sure he meant no harm." But Dutch was not finished. "Peaceful or not, he needs to understand how things work around here. You keep that shield in your house, fine. But do not come crying to us when they show up asking for more favors. Do not expect us to help you when things go wrong." Thomas looked Dutch straight in the eye. "I've never asked anyone for help before, and I do not plan to start now. I live on my land. I mind my business, and I treat people with respect. If that bothers you, then that is your problem, not mine." He pushed past Dutch and walked out of the store, his heart pounding with anger and frustration. As he loaded his supplies into the wagon, he could hear more whispers from people passing by on the street. A woman pulled her child closer as they walked past him, as if he carried some kind of disease. Thomas climbed onto his wagon and started the journey home, but the whispers followed him in his mind. He had not expected this reaction. He thought people would understand that he had simply done a good deed. But fear was a powerful thing, and in this part of the country, fear of the Apache ran deep. As he rode through the dusty trail, Thomas thought about the divisions between people. The settlers feared the Apache because they did not understand them, and probably the Apache had their own fears about the settlers taking their lands and changing their way of life. Thomas found himself caught in the middle, belonging fully to neither side but connected to both. By the time he reached his ranch, the sun was beginning to set. He unloaded his supplies and went inside his cabin. The shield was still there on the wall, beautiful and powerful. Thomas sat down and looked at it for a long time. He realized that Chief Connie's gift had done more than honor him. It had marked him as different, as someone who had crossed an invisible line that most people refused to cross. The shield was both a blessing and a burden, a symbol of friendship that others saw as a symbol of betrayal. Thomas made a decision that night. He would not hide the shield, and he would not apologize for saving Neshoba's life. He would continue to live according to his own principles, treating all people with dignity regardless of what others thought. It would not be easy, and he knew the whispers would continue, but his conscience was clear to outside. The night grew dark and quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Thomas lay down to sleep, knowing that his simple life had become much more complicated, but also knowing that he had done the right thing. That knowledge would have to be enough to sustain him through whatever came next. The town's whispers had begun, but Thomas would not let them change who he was. Thomas spent the rest of that day sitting on his porch, staring at the ceremonial shield that now rested against the wall of his cabin. He traced his fingers over the painted symbols, wondering about the stories behind each mark. The eagle feathers moved gently in the afternoon breeze, and the beadwork sparkled in the sunlight. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever owned, but it also made him feel uneasy. He knew that accepting this gift would change things. Life on the frontier was complicated enough without adding more tension between settlers and the Apache people. Thomas had always tried to keep to himself, avoiding conflict and staying out of other people's business. But now he had a sacred Apache shield hanging in his home, and that was bound to cause talk. The next morning, Thomas needed supplies from town. He loaded his wagon with some cattle hides he planned to sell and began the long journey to the settlement. It was a small trading post called Dusty Creek. About 3 hours away by wagon, the town consisted of a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small church, and a handful of houses scattered along the main road. As Thomas rode into town, he noticed something strange. People were staring at him. Old Mrs. Henderson, who usually waved from her garden, turned away quickly. 2 men standing outside the general store stopped talking and watched him pass with cold eyes. Even the dogs seemed quieter than usual. Thomas tied his horse to the post outside the general store and walked inside. The bell above the door rang, and the conversation inside stopped immediately. 4 men were gathered around the counter, talking with the store owner, Mr. Patterson. They all turned to look at Thomas. "Morning," Thomas said, trying to sound normal and friendly. "Morning, Thomas," Mr. Patterson replied, but his voice was stiff and formal. The other men just nodded slightly, their faces unreadable. Thomas walked to the back of the store to collect the flour and coffee he needed. He could hear the men whispering behind him, but he could not make out the words. The atmosphere in the store felt heavy and uncomfortable, like a storm about to break. When Thomas brought his items to the counter, Mr. Patterson counted them up without looking him in the eye. "That will be $2.15, he said quietly. Thomas paid and started to leave, but one of the men, a tall rancher named Dutch Miller, stepped in front of him. Dutch was known for his bad temper and his strong opinions. He owned a large ranch on the other side of town and had a reputation for causing trouble. "Heard you had some visitors yesterday," Dutch said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Apache visitors," Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes." "That's right. Word is you saved one of them from drowning," another man added. This was Billy Cox, a younger settler who always seemed to follow Dutch around like a shadow. "I saved a woman who was drowning," Thomas corrected. "She was a person in trouble. I would have done the same for anyone," Dutch laughed. But there was no humor in it. "That's real noble of you, Thomas. But some folks are wondering whose side you're on. We got families here, children. We can't have people making friends with the Apache and inviting trouble to our town." Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "I am not inviting trouble. I pulled someone out of a river. That is all. Her father came to thank me. That is all. I am not choosing sides in anything." "That is not what we heard," Billy said, leaning against a barrel of beans. "We heard they gave you some kind of war shield, some kind of Apache weapon. Why would they give you that unless you made some kind of deal with them?" "There was no deal," Thomas said firmly. "It was a gift of gratitude, nothing more." Dutch stepped closer, and Thomas could smell whiskey on his breath even though it was barely noon. "You listen here, Thomas. This territory is dangerous enough without folks like you stirring things up. The Apache have attacked settlements before. They have killed families, stolen cattle. We need to stick together. Not go making friends with them." Mr. Patterson finally spoke up from behind the counter. "Now, Dutch, let us not jump to conclusions. Thomas has always been a peaceful man. I am sure he meant no harm." But Dutch was not finished. "Peaceful or not, he needs to understand how things work around here. You keep that shield in your house, fine. But do not come crying to us when they show up asking for more favors. "Do not expect us to help you when things go wrong." Thomas looked Dutch straight in the eye. "I've never asked anyone for help before, and I do not plan to start now. I live on my land, I mind my business, and I treat people with respect. If that bothers you, then that is your problem, not mine." He pushed past Dutch and walked out of the store, his heart pounding with anger and frustration. As he loaded his supplies into the wagon, he could hear more whispers from people passing by on the street. A woman pulled her child closer as they walked past him, as if he carried some kind of disease. Thomas climbed onto his wagon and started the journey home, but the whispers followed him in his mind. He had not expected this reaction. He thought people would understand that he had simply done a good deed. But fear was a powerful thing, and in this part of the country, fear of the Apache ran deep. As he rode through the dusty trail, Thomas thought about the divisions between people. The settlers feared the Apache because they did not understand them, and probably the Apache had their own fears about the settlers taking their lands and changing their way of life. Thomas found himself caught in the middle, belonging fully to neither side but connected to both. By the time he reached his ranch, the sun was beginning to set. He unloaded his supplies and went inside his cabin. The shield was still there on the wall, beautiful and powerful. Thomas sat down and looked at it for a long time. He realized that Chief Connie's gift had done more than honor him. It had marked him as different, as someone who had crossed an invisible line that most people refused to cross. The shield was both a blessing and a burden, a symbol of friendship that others saw as a symbol of betrayal. Thomas made a decision that night. He would not hide the shield, and he would not apologize for saving Neshoba's life. He would continue to live according to his own principles, treating all people with dignity regardless of what others thought. It would not be easy, and he knew the whispers would continue, but his conscience was clear. Outside, the night grew dark and quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Thomas lay down to sleep, knowing that his simple life had become much more complicated, but also knowing that he had done the right thing. That knowledge would have to be enough to sustain him through whatever came next. The town's whispers had begun, but Thomas would not let them change who he was. Winter arrived early that year, bringing cold winds and frost that covered the ground each morning. Thomas worked harder than ever to prepare his ranch for the harsh months ahead. He repaired his fences, stocked firewood, and made sure his cattle had enough shelter. Neshoba continued to visit, though less frequently now because of the weather and the distance. Each visit was precious to Thomas, a reminder that he was not completely alone in the world. One freezing morning in late November, Thomas woke to find something terribly wrong. He walked outside to check on his cattle as he did every morning, but the field was nearly empty. Where there should have been 15 head of cattle, only 3 remained. The rest had vanished during the night. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Those cattle represented everything he owned, his savings, his future, his ability to survive the winter. Without them, he would have nothing to sell in the spring. He might lose his ranch entirely. He ran to the fence line and found it cut in several places. Large boot prints and horse tracks led away toward the hills. Someone had stolen his cattle. This was not an accident or animals wandering off. This was deliberate theft. Thomas rushed back to his cabin and grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding with anger and fear. He followed the tracks on foot, moving as quickly as he could through the cold morning air. The trail was clear, at least 6 horses and his dozen missing cattle, all heading northwest toward the Rocky Hills. After an hour of tracking, Thomas realized something disturbing. The trail was leading toward Apache territory. The thieves had deliberately driven his cattle in that direction. Thomas stopped walking, suddenly understanding what was happening. This was not just theft. This was a setup. Someone wanted it to look like the Apache had stolen his cattle. Someone wanted to create conflict between Thomas and Chief Connie's people. Or perhaps they wanted to use this as an excuse to attack the Apache camp. Either way, Thomas was being used as a pawn in something much bigger than a simple cattle theft. Thomas turned around and headed back to his ranch, his mind racing. He needed help, but he could not go to the town. The men in Dusty Creek would love an excuse to form a group and ride against the Apache. They had been looking for justification for months. Dutch Miller especially would jump at the chance. By the time Thomas reached his cabin, he had made a decision. He would go to Chief Canny himself. He would tell the chief what happened and ask for help tracking the real thieves. It was risky, very risky. The Apache might not believe him. They might think he was accusing them. But Thomas had to try. He could not let innocent people be blamed for something they did not do. Thomas saddled his horse and rode toward the Apache winter camp. He had never been there before, but Neshoba had described its location, a sheltered valley near the river where the tribe spent the cold months. As he rode, snow began to fall, light flakes that stuck to his coat and hat. It took him 3 hours to find the camp. As he approached, he saw several small structures made of branches and animal hides. Smoke rose from fire pits, and people moved between the shelters doing their daily work. Children played near one of the fires, and women worked on preparing food and repairing clothing. As soon as Thomas rode into view, everything stopped. Women grabbed their children, men reached for weapons, warriors stepped forward with bows and rifles, their faces hard and suspicious. Thomas raised both hands to show he carried no weapon in them, though his rifle was still strapped to his saddle. "I come in peace," Thomas called out in a loud, clear voice. "I need to speak with Chief Canny. It is urgent." A young warrior approached, his bow ready but not drawn. "Why do you come here? White man. You are not welcome." "Please," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his fear. "I am Thomas, the one who saved Neshoba from the river. I need the chief's help. My cattle have been stolen, and someone is trying to make it look like your people took them." The warrior studied him for a long moment, then turned and spoke quickly in Apache to the others. There was a discussion, voices raised in debate. Finally, the warrior nodded and gestured for Thomas to dismount. "You will wait here," the warrior said. "Do not move." Thomas climbed down from his horse and stood still, surrounded by Apache people who watched him with suspicious eyes. He could feel their distrust like a physical weight. Minutes passed slowly. Each second felt like an hour. Children peeked at him from behind their mothers' skirts, whispering and pointing. Finally, Chief Canny emerged from one of the larger shelters. Neshoba walked beside him, her face showing concern when she saw Thomas. The chief approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "Thomas," the chief said, "why have you come to our winter camp? This is not a safe thing for you to do." "Someone stole my cattle last night," Thomas explained quickly. "They cut my fences and drove them toward your territory. I followed the tracks, Chief Canny. This is a trap. Someone wants people to think your tribe took my animals. They want to start a conflict." The chief's eyes narrowed. "And yet you came here, to us. Why would you do this? Why not go to your town and bring men with guns?" "Because I know your people did not do this," Thomas said firmly. "Neshoba has visited my ranch many times. If you wanted my cattle, you could have taken them weeks ago. This is someone else, someone who wants trouble between our peoples." Neshoba stepped forward and spoke to her father in Apache. Her voice was urgent and passionate. Chief Canny listened, then looked back at Thomas. He studied the rancher's face for what felt like forever. "You risk much by coming here," the chief finally said. "Many in your town would call you traitor for this." "I do not care what they call me," Thomas replied. "I care about the truth. Will you help me find who really took my cattle?" Chief Canny was silent for another long moment. Then he turned and spoke to the warriors gathered around. Several of them protested, their voices angry and skeptical. But the chief raised his hand, and they fell silent. "We will help you," Chief Canny declared. "Not because we owe you debt. The debt was already paid. We help you because you showed honor by coming here first. You trusted us when your own people would not. This trust deserves answer." Relief flooded through Thomas. "Thank you, Chief. But understand this," the chief continued, his voice stern. "If we find these thieves, we deal with them our way. Justice will be done, but it will be Apache justice. Do you accept this?" Thomas nodded without hesitation. "I accept." Chief Canny turned to his warriors and began giving orders in Apache. 6 men immediately began preparing their horses and weapons. Neshoba approached Thomas, her hand briefly touching his arm. "You did brave thing," she said softly. "Stupid, but brave." Thomas managed a weak smile. "Seems to be my specialty." Within minutes, a hunting party was ready. Thomas remounted his horse, and together with 6 Apache warriors and Chief Canny himself, they rode back toward Thomas's ranch. The snow fell harder now, but Thomas felt hope for the first time since discovering his missing cattle. The truth was out there somewhere, and now he had allies to help him find it. The group rode through the falling snow in tense silence. Thomas led the way back to his ranch, with Chief Canny beside him and the 6 Apache warriors following close behind. The landscape looked different now, covered in white, and Thomas worried that the snow might have hidden the tracks he needed to follow. When they arrived at Thomas's property, the warriors immediately spread out to examine the crime scene. They moved with incredible efficiency, reading the ground like Thomas read books. One warrior knelt by the broken fence, running his fingers over the cut wire. Another studied the hoof prints in the mud. Now partially covered by snow, the oldest warrior, a man named Dakota with gray streaks in his long hair, called out to Chief Canny in Apache. He pointed to something on the ground. Chief Canny walked over and examined it closely, then picked up a small object and held it up to the light. "What is it?" Thomas asked, moving closer. Chief Canny showed him a brass button, the kind used on military jackets or nice shirts. "This is not Apache," the chief said. "Our people do not use such things. This belongs to white man." Probably someone from town. Thomas felt his suspicions confirmed. "So it was a setup, just as I thought." Another warrior, younger and quick-moving, followed the trail to the edge of Thomas's property. He called back to the group. Speaking rapidly in Apache, Chief Canny translated. "He says the tracks show 6 horses, heavy with riders. They drove your cattle fast, not careful. They wanted to leave clear trail. They wanted to be followed, leading toward your territory," Thomas added, anger rising in his chest, making it obvious. "So anyone who followed would blame your people." Dakota examined the hoof prints more carefully, then stood up and spoke to the chief. Chief Canny nodded thoughtfully. "He says one of the horses has a crack in its shoe on the front left foot. This makes a mark he can follow, even in snow. We can track them." The group mounted their horses again and began following the trail. The Apache warriors were remarkable trackers, seeing signs that Thomas would have missed completely. A broken branch here, a disturbed stone there. The way snow had been kicked up by passing hooves, they moved forward with confidence despite the worsening weather. They rode for 2 hours, climbing into the rocky hills. The trail twisted and turned, clearly meant to confuse anyone following. But the warriors never lost it. Thomas realized he was witnessing skills passed down through generations, knowledge of the land that no school could teach. Finally, Dakota raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. He pointed ahead to a thin line of smoke rising from behind a rocky outcrop. They had found a camp. Chief Canny made a series of quick hand signals, and the warriors immediately dispersed, moving silently to surround the location. Thomas started to follow, but Chief Canny grabbed his arm. "You stay here," the chief commanded quietly. "Let my warriors work if there is fighting." "You stay out of way," Thomas wanted to argue, but he saw the wisdom in it. He nodded and dismounted, watching as the Apache warriors moved like shadows through the rocks. Within minutes they had completely surrounded the camp, and Thomas could hear nothing, no sound at all. Then suddenly, a shout, followed by the sound of men yelling in English. Thomas heard scuffling, the clatter of dropped weapons, more shouting, then silence again. Chief Canny gestured for Thomas to follow, and they walked carefully around the rocks to the hidden camp. What Thomas saw made his blood boil with anger. His 12 stolen cattle were there, penned in a makeshift corral made of rope, and sitting on the ground with their hands bound were 4 men from Dusty Creek. Dutch Miller, Billy Cox, and 2 ranch hands who worked for Dutch. The Apache warriors stood around them with weapons ready. Dutch's face went pale when he saw Thomas. "Thomas, thank God you are here," he said quickly, his words tumbling out. "These savages attacked us. We were just out hunting and—" "Stop lying," Thomas cut him off, his voice cold with fury. "I know what you did. You stole my cattle. You cut my fences. You left a trail pointing toward the Apache camp. You wanted to start a war." Dutch's expression changed from fake relief to real fear, then to anger. "You brought them here," he spat. "You betrayed your own people. You are riding with the Apache against white men. You are a traitor." "I am no traitor," Thomas said firmly. "I am someone who cares about truth. Why did you do this, Dutch? Why steal from me? Why try to start conflict with the Apache?" Billy Cox, who looked terrified, spoke up before Dutch could answer. "It was Dutch's idea," he said quickly. "He said if we could make it look like the Apache stole cattle, we could get the territorial governor to send soldiers. Then we could push the Apache off their land and take it for ourselves. More land means more money." "Shut your mouth," Dutch snarled at Billy. But the damage was done. Chief Kani stepped forward, his face like stone. "So this is truth," he said. "You would kill my people, take our land, all for money. You would use this good man as excuse for your greed." Dutch glared at the chief with pure hatred. "This is our territory now," he said. "You people need to accept that and move on. There's not enough land for everyone. And we were here first with legal claims." "You were not here first," Chief Kani said quietly. "My people have walked this land for more generations than you can count. But that is old argument. What matters now is justice for crime you committed." Thomas looked at his cattle, relieved to see them unharmed, then looked at the 4 captured men. "What happens now?" he asked Chief Kani. The chief considered for a moment. "In Apache way, thieves must make payment double what they stole. But these men also tried to cause war, to have my people killed. This is more serious crime," Dutch laughed bitterly. "You cannot do anything to us," he said. "If we do not return to town, they will send men looking. They will find us. And when they see us prisoners of the Apache, they will bring soldiers." "You are making big mistake," Chief Kani smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We will not keep you prisoner," he said. "We will take you to your town, to your law. Thomas will tell what happened. You will face justice from your own people." "No one will believe him over us," Dutch said confidently. 4 against 1, and he is the one who rides with Apache. Who do you think they will trust?" Thomas felt his heart sink. Dutch was probably right. The people of Dusty Creek already distrusted Thomas. They would likely believe Dutch's version of events, that Thomas had conspired with the Apache to steal cattle and frame innocent men. But Chief Kani had thought of this. He gestured to Dakota, who held up the brass button they had found, along with a piece of torn cloth that matched Billy's shirt. "We have proof," the chief said, "and we have 4 men who panicked when caught. Guilty men panic, innocent men stand firm." Neshoba, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "I will also speak," she said. "I will tell how Thomas came to our camp alone, without weapons, asking for help to find truth. This is not action of guilty man." Thomas felt gratitude wash over him. He was not alone in this. He had allies, friends who would stand with him even when it was difficult. The sun was beginning to set as the group prepared to head back toward civilization. Thomas's cattle were gathered and ready to be driven home. The 4 thieves sat bound on their horses, defeated and silent as they began the journey back. Thomas rode beside Chief Kani. "Thank you," Thomas said simply, "for believing me, for helping me." Chief Kani nodded. "You gave us trust. We give it back. This is how friendship should work." The ride back would be long, and Thomas knew the real battle was just beginning. Convincing the town would not be easy, but at least now he had truth on his side, and friends willing to stand with him. The journey back to Dusty Creek took most of the day. Thomas rode at the front with Chief Kani, leading his recovered cattle. Behind them came the Apache warriors, and in the middle rode the 4 captured thieves. Hands bound and faces grim, The snow had stopped, but the air remained cold and heavy with tension. As they approached the town in late afternoon, people began to notice them. Windows opened, doors creaked, and citizens stepped into the street to stare at the unusual procession. A white rancher leading Apache warriors through town with prisoners was not something they expected to see. By the time they reached the center of town, a crowd had gathered. Thomas could see fear and anger on many faces. Some men ran to fetch their rifles. Women pulled their children inside. The atmosphere crackled with hostility and suspicion. Dutch Miller saw his opportunity. Despite his hands being bound, he began shouting, "Help us! They attacked us! Thomas has turned against his own people. He brought the Apache to kidnap us." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Several men raised their weapons, pointing them at the Apache warriors. Thomas felt panic rising in his chest. This could turn into a massacre in seconds. "Everyone stop!" Thomas shouted, standing up in his stirrups. "Put your guns down. These men are not your enemies. They helped me recover my stolen cattle." "Liar," Dutch yelled. "You are protecting savages. You have become one of them. Mr. Patterson." The store owner pushed through the crowd. "Thomas, what is the meaning of this? Why have you brought armed Apache into our town?" "Because they are the only ones who helped me when I needed it," Thomas replied firmly. "My cattle were stolen 3 nights ago. I tracked them and found these 4 men," he pointed at Dutch and his companions, "hiding in the hills with my animals. They were trying to make it look like the Apache took them." "That is a lie," Billy Cox shouted, though his voice shook with fear. "We were hunting, and we found the cattle wandering. We were bringing them back." "Then why did you cut my fences?" Thomas demanded. "Why did you drive them toward Apache territory? Why did you camp in the hills instead of bringing them directly to me or to town?" The crowd went quiet, considering his words, but Dutch was not finished. "You cannot trust anything he says," Dutch insisted. "Look at him, riding with the Apache, carrying their weapons, wearing their symbols. He has betrayed us all." An older man named Reverend Matthews stepped forward. He was respected in the community, and people listened when he spoke. "This is a serious accusation," the Reverend said carefully. "We need to hear all sides before making judgments. Violence will not serve justice." Chief Connie had remained silent until now, watching the crowd with careful eyes. Now he spoke, his deep voice carrying authority. "Your man Thomas came to our camp alone," he said. "He could have brought you all with guns. He could have attacked us and taken what he wanted. Instead, he came in peace, asking for help to find truth. This is the action of an honest man, not a traitor." "Why should we believe you?" someone in the crowd shouted. "Because we have proof," Neshoba said, stepping forward. She held up the brass button and the torn cloth. "We found these at Thomas's ranch near the broken fence. This button matches the kind your people wear." She pointed at Dutch. "And this cloth matches that man's shirt," she indicated Billy, whose shirt indeed showed a matching tear. Billy's face went pale. He looked at Dutch desperately, but Dutch just glared at him with fury. Reverend Matthews approached and examined the evidence carefully. "These are indeed troubling," he said. "But we need more than buttons and cloth. We need testimony. We need to investigate properly." "Then let us investigate," Thomas said. "Form a council, ask questions, look at the evidence. All I ask is that you listen with open minds and fair hearts." Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. "The Reverend is right. We should convene a town council meeting. Tonight, everyone involved will tell their story, and we will decide what is true." The crowd murmured agreement, though many still looked suspicious and angry. Dutch continued to protest, but no one was listening to him anymore. The Reverend organized the meeting to be held at the church in 2 hours. Giving everyone time to prepare, Chief Canny pulled Thomas aside. "This is good," he said. "They will listen now. But my warriors and I will wait outside town. Our presence causes too much fear. It will not help your case." "You should be there," Thomas argued. "You are part of this story." "Sometimes the best help is to step back," the chief said wisely. "You and Neshoba can speak for what happened. My warriors will guard the prisoners until this is settled. Trust in truth, Thomas. Truth is stronger than fear. As the sun began to set, the small church filled with nearly every adult in Dusty Creek. Thomas sat at the front with Neshoba beside him. Dutch, Billy, and the other two accused men sat on the opposite side. Still bound but now guarded by townsmen instead of Apache warriors, Reverend Matthews acted as the leader of the council. With Mr. Patterson and 3 other respected citizens as judges, the Reverend called for order. "We are here to determine the truth about serious accusations," he began. "Cattle theft, false accusations, and questions of loyalty. Each side will present their case. Then we will deliberate and decide. Thomas, you may speak first." Thomas stood and told his story from the beginning. He described discovering his missing cattle, finding the cut fences, tracking the trail toward Apache territory. He explained his decision to go to Chief Canny rather than forming an angry mob. He spoke about the evidence they found and the capture of the thieves in their hidden camp. When Thomas finished, Dutch presented his version. He claimed they had been hunting in the hills when they found the cattle wandering. He said the Apache had attacked them without provocation and that Thomas had sided with the enemy. His story sounded rehearsed but confident. Then Neshoba spoke. Her English was not perfect, but her words were clear and powerful. She described Thomas arriving at their camp alone, exhausted and desperate, trusting them when he had no reason to. She explained how her people had helped track the real thieves because Thomas had shown them respect and honor. The judges asked many questions. They examined the physical evidence, the button, the torn cloth, the cut fence wire that showed marks from a specific tool. They questioned the 4 accused men separately, and their stories began to contradict each other. Billy especially struggled to keep his lies straight. Finally, after 2 hours of testimony and questions, the judges retired to deliberate. The church was silent as everyone waited. Thomas felt exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. Neshoba sat quietly beside him, her presence a comfort. After 30 minutes, the judges returned. Reverend Matthews stood to deliver their decision. "We have heard all testimony and examined the evidence," he said solemnly. "We find that Thomas's account is truthful and consistent. The physical evidence supports his story. Furthermore, the testimonies of the accused men contain significant contradictions and inconsistencies. Therefore, we conclude that Dutch Miller, Billy Cox, and their companions are guilty of cattle theft and attempted fraud." The church erupted in shocked conversation. Dutch leapt to his feet, shouting protests, but the guards held him back. "Furthermore," the Reverend continued, "we recognize that Thomas acted with integrity throughout this ordeal. He sought justice through proper means rather than violence. He showed wisdom in seeking help from those who could provide it, regardless of their heritage. Thomas is cleared of all accusations of betrayal or conspiracy." Relief flooded through Thomas like a warm wave. People in the crowd began to clap. Slowly at first, then more enthusiastically. Not everyone joined in. Some still looked skeptical or angry, but the majority seemed satisfied with the decision. As people filed out of the church, several came to shake Thomas's hand and apologize for doubting him. Mr. Patterson offered to extend him credit at the store. Others simply nodded with newfound respect. The tide had turned outside. Chief Connie and his warriors waited patiently. When Thomas emerged with Neshoba, the chief smiled. "Justice was done," he said. "Thanks to your help," Thomas replied. "I could not have done this alone." "That is the point," Chief Connie said. "None of us can do everything alone. We need each other, different peoples, different skills, working together. Perhaps this is a lesson your town needed to learn." As the Apache prepared to return to their camp, Thomas felt something had fundamentally changed. The wall of fear and mistrust between 2 communities had cracked. It had not fallen completely. That would take much more time, but a crack had appeared, and through it, light could shine. Spring came early the following year, bringing warm sunshine and new growth to the land. Thomas stood on his porch watching the green grass push through the brown earth, his cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. The winter had been hard, but he had survived it. His ranch was still standing, and his reputation had been restored. Dutch Miller and his accomplices had been sentenced to work off their debt. They spent 6 months repairing roads and building fences for the community, including fixing all the damage they had caused to Thomas's property. Dutch never apologized, but he also never caused trouble again. After serving his sentence, he sold his ranch and left Dusty Creek, heading east to start over somewhere else. The town had changed in subtle but important ways. People who had once avoided Thomas now greeted him warmly when he came to buy supplies. Children no longer ran away when they saw him. Women smiled and nodded. Men asked his advice on farming and ranching. He had become a respected member of the community, not despite his friendship with the Apache, but in some ways because of it. The biggest change came from an unexpected source. After the trial, several town leaders approached Chief County about establishing a formal trading relationship. Mr. Patterson suggested a monthly market where Apache craftspeople could sell their beautiful beadwork, baskets, and woven goods. In exchange, the townspeople would offer tools, cloth, and other manufactured items that were difficult for the Apache to obtain. The first market day was cautious and awkward. People from both communities eyed each other with suspicion, staying on opposite sides of the town square, but Thomas and Neshoba walked between the groups, introducing people, translating words, breaking down barriers with simple human conversation. A settler woman named Mrs. Chen admired a beautifully woven basket. Neshoba's mother, who had made it, showed her the intricate pattern and explained its meaning. The two women could barely understand each other's languages, but they communicated through smiles and gestures. By the end of the day, Mrs. Chen had bought 3 baskets, and Neshoba's mother had purchased fabric to make new clothes for her grandchildren. An Apache elder taught the town blacksmith a technique for tempering metal that made tools stronger and last longer. In return, the blacksmith showed the Apache how to repair wagon wheels and shoe horses more efficiently. Knowledge flowed both ways, enriching everyone. Thomas watched these exchanges with quiet satisfaction. The wall of fear and hatred had not completely fallen. That would take generations, but cracks had appeared. And through those cracks, light was shining. People were beginning to see each other as individuals rather than as enemies. Neshoba continued to visit Thomas's ranch regularly. Their friendship had deepened over the winter months. She taught him the Apache language slowly, and he helped her become fluent in English. They spent long evenings talking about everything: philosophy, dreams, the challenges of living between two worlds, their shared loneliness. One warm spring evening, as they sat on Thomas's porch watching the sunset, Neshoba spoke quietly. "My father says I should return to our traditional lands in the south," she said. "He worries that staying here brings danger to our people, that white settlers will continue pushing us away." Thomas felt his heart sink. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Neshoba was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," she finally said. "Part of me wants to preserve the old ways, to live as my ancestors lived, but another part of me sees that the world is changing. Whether we like it or not, our peoples must learn to live together. Fighting only brings death and sorrow. You do not have to choose alone," Thomas said carefully. "Whatever you decide, you will have friends who support you." Neshoba looked at him with her dark, intelligent eyes. "You have become more than friend. Thomas," she said softly, "you have become family in Apache tradition. When someone saves your life, they become responsible for it. You are my brother now, in all the ways that matter." Thomas felt emotion tighten his throat. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what family felt like. "And you are my sister," he said. "No matter where you go, that will not change." The months that followed brought more integration between the communities. A young Apache man named Chato began working as a guide for settlers traveling through the territory, keeping them safe and teaching them about the land. A settler farmer named John taught Apache families how to grow wheat and corn using irrigation techniques, increasing their food security during difficult seasons. The territorial governor heard about the peaceful cooperation in Dusty Creek and sent a representative to observe and write a report. The representative, a stern man from the east named Mr. Aldridge, arrived expecting to find chaos or deception. Instead, he found two communities working together for mutual benefit. Mr. Aldridge interviewed dozens of people from both sides. He attended a town council meeting where Apache representatives sat alongside settler leaders. Discussing water rights and grazing boundaries, he watched the monthly market, seeing genuine friendship and respect developing between former strangers. Before leaving, Mr. Aldridge requested a meeting with Thomas. They sat in the small church, and the representative studied Thomas with curious eyes. "How did you do this?" he asked. "How did you convince these people to set aside generations of fear and hatred?" Thomas shook his head. "I did not convince anyone of anything," he said honestly. "I just treated people with respect and fairness, regardless of where they came from. Others saw that it was possible and decided to try it themselves. Change did not come from speeches or laws. It came from small acts of kindness repeated over and over until they became normal." Mr. Aldridge wrote everything down in his notebook. "The territorial government is considering your town as a model for other settlements," he said. "If this can work here, perhaps it can work elsewhere." "Perhaps," Thomas agreed, "but it requires people to choose courage over fear, to choose understanding over hatred. That is not always easy." Years passed, and the legend of the giant Apache woman rescued from the river became a story told to children in both communities. But it was not told as a simple rescue story. It was told as the beginning of something larger, a reminder that one act of kindness could change the course of history. The ceremonial shield that Chief Canny had given Thomas remained on his wall, a symbol of the bond between peoples. Visitors to his ranch would ask about it, and Thomas would tell them the whole story, about Neshoba, about Dutch's betrayal, about the trial, about choosing truth over convenience. The shield had protected Thomas, not through magic or supernatural power, but by representing something important: trust, honor, and the courage to stand for what was right, even when it was difficult. These were the real shields that protected communities. Not walls or weapons, but shared values and mutual respect. Thomas never became wealthy. His ranch remained small and simple, but he lived a life rich in friendship and purpose. He had found family among people he never expected, had helped build bridges where others saw only chasms, had proved that different peoples could live together in peace when they chose understanding over fear. As he grew older, Thomas often sat on his porch at sunset, watching the land he loved. Sometimes Neshoba would visit with her children, teaching them about both Apache and settler ways, preparing them for a world where they would need to understand both cultures. Sometimes young people from town would come seeking his advice, asking how to resolve conflicts or build relationships across differences. And Thomas would always tell them the same thing: start with one small act of kindness. Do not worry about changing the whole world. Just help one person, treat one stranger with respect. Choose fairness over advantage one time, then do it again tomorrow. And the day after that, change builds slowly, like a river carving through stone, but it is unstoppable if you do not give up. The story of Thomas and Neshoba became a legacy that outlived them both, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the simple human choice to see others as people worthy of dignity and respect. The shield on the wall remained in Thomas's family for generations, a reminder that the greatest rewards come not from what we take, but from what we give.